Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Shaken Not Burned, a podcast about the big sustainability stories and solutions. My name's Felicia Jackson and I'm joined today by my co-hosts Julia Bottaro and Heather Dinwoody. We talk about the stories that we think tell us something about the way the world is changing and talk to people actively working to build a better future. Now, as you know, we pick 3 stories each week that we think reflects what's going on in the world, and Julia is going to kick us off this week.
Absolutely, and hello everyone. So today I'm going to talk about how the boom of the fast fashion industry in China is disrupting global transportation of goods. So we have Shein and Temu. We may know them as the brands that are producing very, very, very cheap items. They're growing in popularity in this part of the world, so in Europe and also North America. And so these companies their business model is to ship directly from the factory to the consumer, and all the factories are in China at the moment. However, there is also some disruption in the Red Sea because of geopolitical turmoil. And so all sorts of companies that are trying to ship from China to the Western world are preferring to go via air freight. But because Shein and Temu have so much to ship, they're squeezing the capacity of planes. Just to give you some figures, they send, the 2 companies, between them, almost 600,000 packages to the US only every single day. That's an insane figure. I'm going to let it sit for a bit. And then also Temu and Shein, plus TikTok and Alibaba, other 2 major Chinese names, are filling 108 Boeing 777 also each day, with their products just flying across the side of the world. And I mean, we know that Shein has grown so much in popularity. It now accounts for 1/5 of all e-commerce sales globally. And I think that here, we can be concerned for various reasons. We've got the greenhouse gas emissions of all these products being flown around the world, plus, of course, all the social issues of how these products are made, because we know that they're made by exploiting labor, plus, of course, all the issues, the environmental issues around what these products are made of. But, I think as consumers here, we can really try to just simply not buy from these sites. I'm sure that many people can live without the £5 tops. And, one of these arguments for, in favor of this type of brands is, well, how about the less wealthy people? What are they going to buy? Well, it turns out, according to UBS research, that in the States, the average Shein consumer is a 35-year-old woman with a salary of $65,000 per year, and someone who would spend around $100 per month in clothing. So, I do agree that there is a place for cheap fashion for the people that need it, but it turns out that probably most of the consumers that buy these products don't really need them.
I don't like that argument about, okay, well, some people are less well off. What do you expect them to buy? Because I feel like it's basically trotted out to bring us down from our high horses when we talk about how bad some of these fast fashion brands are for the planet. Because, certainly from my experience, I've known people that the people I know who shop fast fashion are buying so much more than I would ever buy. I don't spend the most on my clothes. I do try and buy well, but I'm not restocking my wardrobe every 2 minutes. The thing about fast fashion, it's the cycling of seasons. It's not seasons anymore, is it? There's new styles every week, and it's constantly drip fed down people's throats. And if you ask me, it's more of, I don't want to call it an addiction kind of thing, but it's brands capitalizing on that immediate relief. And that's what brands like Shein and Temu rely on. It's people seeking that instant gratification. So that's the real issue here to me.
There's a real issue here, as you say, Heather, around this idea of capturing the zeitgeist, but the zeitgeist isn't something long anymore. It's what was worn on the red carpet and can I have it out and available in the next 3 days? It's what's the latest fashion on TikTok and can everybody get hold of something? And I think it's not about poverty. It's about the sort of rampant consumerism that is driving the sort of current economic model, the model of growth, this idea. And I'm not saying growth is a bad thing, but it's how we grow and it's what we consider to be valuable. Because if you think about it, with the growth in fast fashion alone, you're talking about massive increases in materials consumption, massive increase in sort of poor quality, not very long lasting goods that then end up in landfill. So it's not just a question of, there's been such a growth in this one particular area that it's affecting air freight, because that's a whole separate question. But there is this thing that what we're talking about is an exacerbation of that model that says it doesn't matter as long as it's new, as long as it's the latest.
Absolutely. And I think, there's different bands to consider here, isn't there? There's people who maybe they can only afford a very small amount of cheap clothing. To me, that is entirely separate from someone who is buying 20 t-shirts for £2 each rather than, a couple for £20 each. It's that there are different bands, and I think that's what we have to consider here. We can't just lump people into baskets and say, I appreciate we've got this kind of profile of Shein's biggest audience members, but there are, there's so many intricacies within there. And I think, this story about the air freight, to me, I feel like the story has been put out to say sort of, this is these poor other businesses who can't use the planes. And if I'm right, I think they have actually, a lot of carriers have started increasing their capacity, so basically putting more planes in the sky, which naturally we know that's not good for the environment. But to me, the story here is not about squeezing capacity. It's about, as Fee said, it's about changing that model, changing that need for instant gratification, because there's, it's not, it shouldn't be a problem of, oh, that plane's full of this person's goods, so
we need another plane.
What am I going to do? We need another plane. We need more planes. And I don't want to sort of, we don't want to be angry about, oh, Shein's taking too much capacity, so we need more planes, because that completely defeats the point.
Well, I think there's a really interesting thing here. And I think it breaks out into two things, one of which is the modes of transportation that we use throughout the supply chain. And the other one is the resilience of the supply chain overall. Because we know that at the moment, while airlines are talking a lot about sustainable aviation fuel, it's not really in use. We know that airplanes are, as you say, very damaging to the environment. So piling on a load of new planes to get things to people as quickly as possible seems antithetical to the goal of improving the environment. But the big question for me is about the overall resilience of the supply chain, because, there's an awful lot of goods that get passed through boats and hands up, shipping has got massive environmental issues as well, because that's not actually using low carbon fuel. But the one thing we learnt in the pandemic was all these traditional models of just-in-time manufacturing to make sure everything's delivered just as it's needed and exactly the right time. They fell over. And they will fall over again when there's a problem. So we talk about geopolitical issues, preventing a lot of shipping travel, through the Suez or wherever it might be. But from the looks of things, we're going to have an ongoing issue with a lot of different challenges. We know that it's difficult to get ships through the Suez when there isn't enough rainfall, because there's not enough water to support ships big enough to transport the volume of goods that go through it. That happened last year. Now we're talking about growing demand is accelerating demand for aeroplanes. It just feels like everyone is looking at an immediate solution to a short-term problem without thinking about the consequences of any decision for anyone except their own bottom line and their own financial bottom line.
We're putting out fires rather than addressing the cause of the fires.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering whether anyone will do anything about this. You know, the rise of these superpowers in the fast fashion, now that they're disrupting other industries. And, you know, it's not that I feel sorry for these poor other products that cannot be shipped.
They're just going to tack on more planes.
Yeah, but don't forget, when you say who's going to deal with it, who can deal with it? You know, we have a global economic system where the decisions that these companies made are driven by their need or expectation to make money. You know, it's not like a country can interfere with what's happening in the market, is it? You know?
That's true.
I just think the carriers are going to keep adding extra planes, and it's a complex problem because you've got to educate and guide consumers, but you've also got to incentivize companies to work with their consumers. You know, it's, as we always go on about, it's really got to be a holistic approach. Like, maybe that will involve some regulation, but it'll also involve just a massive behavioral shift. And, you know, even if we think beyond this, beyond the issue of freight, we've also got to change our entire relationship with clothing, whether that's the materials or the durability, all of it. It's, you know, this story is very symptomatic, I would say. It's symptomatic of a system problem. Yes.
One thing that springs to mind here is France has proposed a bill to add a €5 tax to each garment that is bought on fast fashion websites. And so, you know, I think it's all, you know, it's not going to save the planet, but it's definitely a way to help shift the mindset of consumers. So I think that's definitely one to watch.
To be honest, I think it's a great idea, but €5 isn't going to make a big difference to someone who's buying something for a couple of euros. I mean, it might do, but it seems to me unlikely.
I think it depends, because if you're
not saying
buying...
it's not a good idea, anything's worth a try.
Yeah, I mean, if you're buying 10 items, which lots of people do, they just buy loads at the same time. And then lots of people also buy stuff that they know they will return. So, you know, I imagine that you'll get refunded, but the tax doesn't get refunded. So, you know, I think that still is a bit of a contribution. It's not
That's interesting.
a silver bullet, but...
I think it was towards the end of last year, actually, I came across a story about a lot of companies sort of ending their free returns practice. Now, they've probably done that because they were just getting so many returns that it was bad for business. But it does, you know, that does also have a trickle-down effect on, I mean, you know, you get all these YouTube videos and, sorry, that's probably very behind the times. It's probably all TikToks and everything with people opening their hauls, and it's just kind of, oh, well, I'll send that back. I'll send all that back. And, you know, if companies are saying, okay, well, you can't return for free anymore, that's a disincentive. And it's all these, you know, I agree, Fee. I don't think it's necessarily going to be this massive big thing just from France introducing a tax, but all of these little things do add up, and things are happening. There are movements all over the world towards slower fashion, more care. Consumers are showing an interest. It just needs to build.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good time to move to our second story, because we're talking about what can be done in order to change the way in which the system operates. And Heather's got a story that I think speaks to government failure to take that seriously.
It sure does, yes. So I'm being a bit cheeky. I'm combining two stories here. So the first kind of element to discuss is the fact that the UK has been taken back to court over its revised carbon budget strategy. So this is how it's going to deliver on its net zero goals. And for those of you who think that this all sounds a bit familiar, that is because it has happened before. And it's the same three organisations that are taking this action. So it's Client Earth, the Good Law Project, and Friends of the Earth. So far, there's been a 3-day hearing, and the High Court has said that this can move forward, so we're now just waiting on a ruling. Last time, they ruled in favour and found the government sort of, I don't know if you would say found guilty in this case.
They were found in contravention of the Climate Change Act.
That's the one. Forgive my lack of legal jargon. And the other element I also wanted to draw in on this was just, within the same week, a charity called Feedback Global has also launched legal action against the UK government about a sort of post-Brexit trade deal with Australia. And they are claiming that the government hasn't considered how food imports from Australia will negate its chance of achieving its climate and biodiversity goals. They're just saying that, it's not considered the environmental impacts. They're not factored in anywhere. They're not accounted for anywhere. And I just think all of this points to, as you say, it's a government failing. But to me, it's really fascinating just to talk about the law, I think, because, the law should not be... It's not the law's responsibility to deal with this. It is government's responsibility. This should be a policy issue. But where the legal system can help us is just ensuring that governments are held to account for delivering as they say they're going to. And I find it so inspiring when you hear these stories of people that are really fighting to use old laws in a different way and even create new laws that can really help just sort of safeguard these policy measures.
Can I jump in just with something that's actually not, so it's not my story, but I was quite excited about it. That a Belgian recently announced that they're making ecocide a law. I don't know if you've heard about ecocide, but basically this movement was started by a lawyer called Polly Higgins, and she was trying to get on the international court's books a crime of ecocide, where, destruction of the earth and the ecosystem was an international crime on a level of genocide. And there was actually an introduction of a law towards the end of last year in the UK. It obviously didn't pass. It was a draft bill. But again, it's this thing of the balance between using the law to try and ensure that people behave in the right way. It's introducing new laws to change the way in which people accept accountability and responsibility and indeed transparency. And there are lots of people out there who might think that having an international crime of ecocide is moving too far. But listen, all these guys are doing, Heather, the people you're talking about, is trying to say the UK law is that the Climate Change Act needs to be adhered to, and the government's got a policy that isn't clear enough, that doesn't assess the risks properly, and they're saying they're failing in their duty.
Well, I'll tell you a little story about how I ended up working in sustainability, actually. So when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I was doing criminology. I started it from a perspective of just having watched too much TV and I wanted to catch the bad guys. And I did a module and it was called Crimes of the Powerful, and it talked about environmental crimes and also just a lot of white collar crime, that kind of thing, by powerful actors. And I distinctly remember writing a whole essay, and this would have been 6 or 7 years ago now. I wrote a whole essay about whether these crimes should be viewed as crimes rather than harm, because in a lot of cases these things aren't legally, well, they're not illegal, they are just considered harmful. And to me that, that kind of epitomizes the ecocide movement, because ecocide is saying, no, this should be seen as a crime. And globally, we've seen this massive increase in climate litigation cases being brought. And at the moment, a lot of them are relying heavily on things like human rights laws. So they're saying, I have a right to a clean and healthful environment. So this environmental act is a breach of my human rights. Whereas what the introduction of ecocide does is it sort of enshrines that as being illegal for what it is. Rights violations are not. And I just think that's extremely powerful. And if we want to talk about solutions, I would argue it's not what you would think of as a classic solution. It is a way of safeguarding promised solutions. making sure that people are held to account and making sure that solutions are delivered as they are promised to be.
Yeah, and I actually think, again, you're talking about accountability, and this is so fundamental, goes hand in hand with transparency. But what we've got is a government that is consistently being held up as not doing its job on net zero, not doing the job that the Climate Change Act committed the country to many years ago. It's been taken to task by the Climate Change Committee, the independent review that's tasked with ensuring the country stays on track. It's being taken to court by bodies saying the government's not doing its job. You know, we know that that the best scientific research says there is no room for new oil and gas, and we've got a government that's opening new oil and gas licenses. And it kind of feels, again, I know I'm always talking about time horizons and people making short-term decisions, but it really does feel like the government is focused on ensuring that those people who don't understand, you know, the details of how climate change is going to impact on their energy supply, on the supply chain, on the cost of what they eat and drink and use to heat their homes. People who don't understand the connection between climate change risk and the economy. And they're kind of going, no, we're all about the economy. We're going to give you tax cuts. Vote for us. And it feels like they're just using lack of knowledge as an excuse to speak to the baser instincts of all of us, because, you know, none of us want to spend money on things we can't afford. None of us want to be in the middle of a cost of living crisis. It just feels like we need politicians who actually have a vision for what might be possible in the future.
And when certain politicians who will remain nameless do their
yes, we don't want to be sued,
backtracks and U-turns on certain net zero commitments, some of the reasons that have been given are things like, oh, well, you know, we've been very ambitious in this regard. We've done this, we've done that. And I think if you're literally being taken to court for failure of delivery, for the holes in your plan,
you're clearly not as ambitious.
Shoot holes in your entire argument. And I think if you can say that, if you can point to that and just say, look, these are the facts. You have been told that your plan isn't good enough. So you cannot turn around and say that it's too ambitious.
I think this is a good time for a little Brexit rant, because I was reading the story Heather, and it says that ultimately this Australia move is going to undercut British farmers who are trying to respect environmental laws and, you know, trying to adhere to environmental standards. And it's like, well, we voted for I didn't, but I couldn't even vote, obviously. But people voted for Brexit to protect the interests of the country, and this is doing the exact opposite. You know, this might be in the interests of someone, certainly not the farmers, not our health either, because another point that someone was making is that this could, you know, cheaper meat and milk coming from Australia could encourage people to buy more animal products, which not only are unsustainable, but also, you know, they're not great for your health compared to vegetables and plant-based products and so on. So it really, who is this benefiting? You know, who is this agreement benefiting?
Well, Julia, I absolutely love that, because it brings in my story of the week, which is actually about China mandating ESG reporting. Now, it might not sound like it's a close connection, but you're talking about the lack of environmental governance if you're allowing in, animal products and dairy from a country which has different environmental controls. One of the things that often comes up in the discussion of ESG, because it's very politicized, is this idea that, you know, ESG is an attack on free speech, and it's the liberals trying to get companies to be woke and focus on diversity and in the environment. And, you know, to be fair, it is an attempt to get people to focus on social goods and the environment, but in terms of managing risk. Now, what the Chinese have done, they have turned around and basically said they are, from 2026 on 3 of the major exchanges in China, They are going to demand reporting on governance, strategy, risk management, metrics and targets. And it actually includes things like biodiversity and climate impact. What makes it really interesting is that they're using the double materiality approach, which is not just the impact on the company, but the impact of the company on the environment and society for the metrics that they're going to use. The reason this is fascinating to me is in the US, obviously, especially in an election year, the question of ESG has become highly politicized. The SEC has been, I think, now for nearly 2 years, been expected to release its rules on climate risk reporting, and they keep being delayed. But what to me is really interesting is this idea of how the acceptance of ESG and climate risk reporting in different markets is going to change the global trade model. Because, you know, the UK might be failing to fulfill its legal duties under the Climate Change Act. But as I said, there's all these discussions about the economy and the need not to put extra pressure on things. But if China, which is the second largest economy in the world, is going to introduce mandatory reporting, we've got the EU, which is a sixth of the global economy, that is introducing mandatory reporting. There's discussion at the moment about it being delayed, but they are introducing mandatory climate risk reporting using double materiality. And California, actually with its SB 253 and 261, is introducing mandatory climate risk reporting for corporates. That's the world's fifth largest economy. So the US is the world's largest economy as a whole, but California alone is the fifth largest economy. So you've got China, the EU and California all saying mandatory climate risk reporting is necessary so that we can understand the risks of climate change, so we can understand what impact that's going to have on whether we can grow certain foods in certain places, whether we can transport things from one place to another and how much it's going to cost us to do so. If companies are operating in a globalized world, and most of them are, why would they not bother to do the research in one part of their business where they have to do that research to report in major markets? Fundamentally, while everyone's arguing the politics, there is a shift in what companies are expected to do and how they're expected to measure and report on the way in which their business acts. Investors are expected to pay attention to that. Whatever the politics, we're going to start having more transparency about what's really going on. We're going to have more discussions about the connection between business behavior, climate impact, nature resilience, all of these different things. And I'm really quite excited. You know, it's about the fact that that the world is being pushed by state decision making to consider risk in a different light. And looking at double materiality and making people understand the links between climate change and our resilience as an economy. And that means our resilience as societies. That to me is incredibly exciting.
What I love about this story, Fee, is that it's an example to provide to all the people that are always asking, what about China? You know, the classic argument, but the UK is only a small country in the world. We put all this effort into being sustainable, but then China ruins all our little efforts because it's such a big polluting economy. Well, China is doing something. I think China was already doing something in the renewable energy space, for example.
China is the world's largest deployer of renewable energy. So last year, China deployed more renewable energy than I think the whole of solar power deployment in the last decade. It's an insane amount of power. There is a problem that not all that power is being connected to the grid, but they are the world's biggest sort of renewable superpower.
Yeah. And I think, this ESG law is the number 2 example to provide. And also it shows that if you start, even as a relatively small country, or jurisdiction, if you start by imposing your requirements to companies, other jurisdictions will follow suit because they will see the benefits of doing it. So I think it's a very exciting development.
There's also, it actually does speak to perception in the private sector that ESG is beginning to be seen more and more as a way of building value, because there's a real difference between understanding value and understanding purely financial return. Because you do have to have functioning economies in society to buy the stuff that people want. And it is this thing that as the world starts to move towards this sense of accountability and transparency, you're actually seeing the private sector recognize that there is a real potential for the growth in value. I think there's definitely a sense that return on ESG investments is still a few years away. But it's seen as really significant in terms of customer relationships, in terms of brand reputation, and potentially now, in terms of actually meeting the regulations of the places in which they operate. That's something we really can't afford to forget. Anyway, so those are our stories for this week. I've, as you can tell, got a little bit overexcited about the last one, but I do think we're moving towards a place of greater accountability. We're moving towards a place of greater transparency. And we need to extend that into different sectors and across different parts of society. And even if that means that we have to start thinking about fast fashion in a different light and not buy as many T-shirts, every single part of it makes a difference. And every single choice we make contributes to it. So on that note, we will move to our interview of the week. Today, we're lucky enough to be joined by Rumbi Fende, the co-founder of Mama Codes. Now, this is an organisation of the type we don't normally cover because we're often looking for new technologies, things that are breaking the mould, that are changing the way in which we do things. But I think it's really important that we pay attention to those organisations which are trying to change the way in which things work. So, Rumbi, could you explain to the audience what Mama Codes is all about?
Thanks so much for having me, Felicia. Really appreciate it. I'll never turn down a chance to shout from the rooftops about what we do. So Mama Codes is now 7 years old, and we teach 3 to 13-year-olds how to code. Though our sweet spot is 3 to 7. But we teach primary school children, essentially. We passionately believe, myself and my co-founder, Leanne, in equity in education, and especially after COVID, seeing the disparity with access and just parents and children struggling to meet their basic needs. A cornerstone of what we do is to bring coding skills and access to children who would otherwise not have it. So we are a for-profit business, because when I speak like that, I often get, are you a charity? Like, no, no, we're not. We are a for-profit business. We teach online code clubs predominantly, but we also teach after-school clubs as well. And that, pays our bills and is crucial and important. But the driver for myself and Leanne is to take what we have and give it to those who don't have it. So we do a lot of work with partner charities. I had an iPad and I haven't seen it in 4 years because I donated it to one of the charities we work with because the mums didn't have one. So that's the only way that we could get her child on board. That's pretty much what kind of gets us up in the morning, is just being able to make a difference.
So what really interests me about all of this is the importance of coding for children, because I know it was something that was introduced into the wider curriculum a few years ago. But I think what's particularly interesting is this recognition of how the world around us is changing, and that if you don't have access to the skills that come with digital literacy, with understanding how things are built, it's so easy to get left behind. So what sorts of things do you teach the children?
We'll break up the age ranges. So, because of course a huge section can't read or write yet. So there's the nursery, which is 3 to 4, who are taught the principles of coding. We use block programming, so it's color-based. So it's very much the way that they would learn. We teach coding as a language. They learn how to make things happen. They learn autonomy. They learn how to create worlds by dragging and dropping. So a yellow block might mean movement. A blue block might mean sound, for example. And by constructing them, they learn that they are in control of the computer and not a passive recipient of whatever the computer brings them. That's the starting block. Normally about 6 weeks to a term is usually all that's needed at that stage, because children learn super, super quickly. And for 5 to 7 year olds, we teach Scratch Junior, which is building on those principles again. The younger ones can't read or write, but the coding gets a little more complicated. They start to create their own little worlds. They learn that coding is creative and fun and imaginative. It's not the Matrix, which is what I think a lot of our generation tend to think. It's binary numbers. It's not. It's a place to express themselves. If they want to have, dinosaurs or pyramids, they can, but they will learn sequencing. They'll learn logical thinking. They will learn problem solving. They will learn that they've got to go back and check their code. These are adult principles of coding. And that's what they learn at that age. And then 8 to 13 or 8 to 11 is where we teach Scratch, which is more widely known. Many schools do teach that, but even many more don't. So it's a bit of a lottery as to who has access to coding education in the school, depending on what postcode you're in or what area you live in. But it is more well known. And then due to demand, 11 to 13, we're now going into Wix. At that age, they want to learn how to build websites, and a lot of them are like, I want to be an influencer. And just teaching them the basic building blocks of coding before they go into big school where they learn Python, etc. Once they've left us.
What I love about this is you mentioned this idea of children learning to question and to check their code and to go back and to see coding as something that allows them autonomy and power in their interaction with the digital world. Because I think one of the things that's becoming more apparent, there's all this conversation in the media about AI and how it's changing everything. And for those of us who were around in the first digital evolution, revolution, whatever you want to call it, there is often a sense of disempowerment for people who see their lives being changed by those things around them. Do you see this as a means for helping children understand the world around them beyond just the fact of learning coding?
Yes. My Leanne often says to parents who might ask a similar question, saying, a child learns maths not to become a mathematician, but how to count change and how to tell the time. The principles are the same with coding. It's not so you become a coder. It's more, coding is now in everything we do. It's in law. It's in football, VAR. It's everywhere at the moment, for example. So when we speak to a lot of children, it's just tapping into their passions and understanding that technology is increasingly forming a central part of that. And it's important for them, if they are going to explore what they truly love, to understand how it works and potentially how they could make a change. I think that's the key learning for us, is encouraging them to be mindful, to be present, and to really just take control of their destinies by being unafraid, particularly girls, being unafraid of STEM, being unafraid of science, being unafraid, knowing that there's a space for them. It's not for other people. It's not something inaccessible that they could never do. It's actually part of the life they're already living. Because we teach online, Zoom, what they're using, that is technology. And it's important. Once it's framed like that, then the light bulb comes on. It's like, oh, okay, so it's not some weird and crazy thing. I'm actually living in this world already, and I'm really interested to know how it makes what I care about work, essentially. So that's kind of how we approach our teaching with children.
That sounds brilliant. I mean, for me personally, obviously, anything that helps children learn to understand that they are in charge of the change in their lives is incredibly powerful, because that's what we're always going on about with regard to sustainability and recognizing the reality of the world around you and your choices and consequences. So it seems to me like there's a really natural fit. I just wonder, are there companies that come to you and try and work with you because they're looking at, developing their sort of social sense and indeed their sort of educational outreach, because this is such an important thing for children to learn?
It is. And I think that's conversations we're definitely starting to have. We have just agreed a major new partnership, which I can't name just yet. I hope they're good, but I can't. But I'll be talking about that on my socials in the next couple of days. But to answer your question, yes, I think there is more consciousness among companies. There is a desire to not just be all talk, but to demonstrably give back. So from a CSR perspective, we'll have, speaking externally, there are partners they already work with. And if they work with children, then we would step in and offer, free coding classes. The great thing with coding is it's so asynchronous in so many ways. People think of coding as one thing, but, you can learn maths through coding. You can learn history through coding. We teach about the Great Fire of London using coding. You construct the world, but you're also being educated on what happened, when it happened. So it doesn't matter what the subject is. It can all be taught through coding. Our earliest coders learn to code their names, for example. They learn how to do that. So we will work with partners to bring, for example, if we're teaching financial literacy, that can be done. If you want a child to learn what saving means, that can be done through coding. It's a whole world so far beyond what maybe our generation of yourself and myself, Felicia, might have thought historically. There was so much more that was possible, so many ways to teach in a lateral way. So with companies, that's what we do. Externally, internally, of course, companies are formed by people, the majority of whom are parents. So we do a lot of work as well. We've had hackathons in companies. We've had employee days where they'll bring their kids. And what I find truly rewarding is being able to have the children from our charity, Nova being our main charity. They are in North Kensington and they work with the Grenfell community. So we've been working with them for 4.5 years now, offering free code clubs. Having those children go to HQ, often in the city, to code with the children of employees. It's very much just bringing different worlds together. Often these children have never even been to the city. They have no idea what that's like. And just to know what's possible from all sides and get these children together and creating together is what we do. So yeah, we work with companies in those both respects. So if anyone's interested, let me know.
And on that note, you can find the details of how to get in touch with Mama Code in the show notes. I have to say, I think it just sounds like such an incredible initiative. The idea that you teach children how to construct their own world, the idea that you give power to children as they grow to understand how they as adults can make change. I just think it sounds amazing and it's really exciting. So thank you so much for joining us today, Rumbi. It's been absolutely amazing to learn about Mama Codes and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much, Felicia. Thanks for having me.